So, the thing that's been bothering me most about Game of Thrones in Season 7 isn't the fast travel, it isn't the plot holes, it's really just one thing, and I think I could forgive everything else if not for this one tiny thing, and that is the Winterfell subplot. Pitting Arya and Sansa against one another in one of Littlefinger's most inexplicable but also diabolical plans. This came to a head this past week in the episode Beyond the Wall, when Arya confronts Sansa about the letter she wrote at the behest of Cersei Lannister to Robb, asking him to forego his war against the Lannisters and against Joffrey, to bend the knee and to save Ned Stark in the process. Well, Arya confronts Sansa about this, telling her that she helped kill their father, and she reads the letter to her.
I write to you today with heavy heart. Our good King Robert is dead. Killed from wounds he took in a boar hunt.
You don't have to read it, I remember.
Father has been charged with treason. He conspired with Robert's brothers against my beloved Joffrey and tried to steal his throne. The Lannisters are treating me well and providing me with every comfort. I beg you, come to King's Landing, swear fealty to King Joffrey, and prevent any strife between the great houses of Lannister and Stark. Your faithful sister Sansa.
So this is where things start to go downhill fast. Arya is very angry at Sansa for writing this letter, even though Sansa has a perfectly valid response, which is, I was made to. I was a child. The Lannisters told me what to do, and I thought it would help. Ned, let's listen a little bit more.
They forced me to do it.
Did they? With a knife at your throat? Did they put you on a rack and stretch you until your bones started to pop?
You don't know what it was like. I was a child.
So was I. I would have let them kill me before I betrayed my family.
They told me it was the only way to save Father.
And you were stupid enough to believe them.
Basically, nothing that Arya says at any point in this conversation makes any sense. She conveniently leaves out the fact that she was at one point a prisoner at Harrenhal and was the cupbearer for Tywin Lannister, had an assassin willing to take 3 lives for her, and completely failed to even take out one important figure. And yet she has the audacity to claim that Sansa somehow betrayed Ned Stark by just writing a letter that she thought would help. And it gets worse from there. Arya says she remembers seeing Sansa the day that Ned died. But of course, if you go back and watch that scene, you can tell pretty quickly that Sansa is screaming in horror at what Joffrey's doing and had no expectation that this would actually happen. In the books, it's an Arya chapter, and she clearly describes hearing Sansa's screams. And I realize this is an adaptation, but, at this point in the adaptation, things are pretty close. So we can assume that Arya did very clearly hear Sansa screaming while Joffrey and Sir Ilan Payne murdered their father.
I remember you standing on that platform with Joffrey and Cersei when they dragged Father to the block. I remember the pretty dress you were wearing. I remember the fancy way you did your hair.
You were there?
I was there, standing in the crowd near Baelor's statue.
And what did you do? Did you come running to the rescue? Did you fight off the Lannisters and save Father?
I wanted to.
But you didn't, just like me.
I didn't betray him. I didn't betray Robb. I didn't betray our entire family for my beloved Joffrey.
I guess I'm just confused at why Game of Thrones is making Arya so incredibly, bafflingly dense. Sansa, on the other hand, is making perfectly valid responses. But it's almost a one-sided conversation. Arya's just angry, and Sansa's surprised. And, well, so are we. And it only gets worse and worse as the scene goes on. Sansa says a few other things. She points out that she saved the North by bringing the Knights of the Vale, and that no one would even be in Winterfell right now if it hadn't been for her. And then she points out that, all this squabbling between them would be a huge gift to Cersei.
Do you know how happy Cersei would be right now if she saw us fighting? This is exactly what she wants. This is what she's always wanted, to tear
You're
us
scared the
apart.
Northern Lords will read it. They wouldn't think much of Lady Sansa if they knew how she did Cersei's bidding.
And yes, now we've entered blackmail territory. Arya is going to blackmail Sansa into not betraying Jon or something. I really don't understand where all of this is coming from. There's no indication that Sansa is going to betray Jon, and as I've said in the past, Jon was perfectly willing to let her be queen if she wanted, and she didn't want it. In fact, all she'd have to do is send Jon a raven and say, hey, can I be queen now? And Jon, who doesn't really want the job, would probably be fine with that. Of course, nobody is sending one another ravens. Heaven forbid Jon actually communicate with his sisters in Winterfell about, finding dragonglass, going on a deadly mission to capture a white, meeting up with Cersei, falling in love with Daenerys, and so on and so forth. And then there's other plot holes.
What would little Lyanna Mormont say? She's younger than you were when you wrote this. Are you going to say, but I was just a child?
First of all, Lyanna Mormont is not imprisoned by the Lannisters with, her father's head on the line. So this is just a stupid thing to say. Second of all, Lyanna Mormont had left Winterfell before Arya arrived. She doesn't even know little Lyanna Mormont. It's just bad writing. And the plot holes don't even stop there. Right when Arya reads the note to Sansa in the first place, she says,
That's your pretty handwriting? Septa Mordain used to crack my knuckles because I couldn't write as well as you.
But we heard earlier, last week, that this is a copy of the letter made by Master Luwin. It's not the original, which was sent to Robb and Catelyn. So it would be Master Luwin's handwriting. Again, this is just an avoidable plot hole that makes no sense and just, it feels lazy.
Sometimes anger makes people do unfortunate things.
Sometimes fear makes them do unfortunate things. I'll go with anger.
And I guess sometimes just wanting to finish a show and rush it out makes people do unfortunate things. This entire travesty of a plot is a pretty good example of trying to just get the show over with and insert silly, ridiculous drama even where it doesn't belong. So now we have to watch the Stark girls not just fight or distrust each other, but actively threaten one another. In a later scene, when Sansa's searching through Arya's rooms, Arya literally confronts her with a Valyrian steel dagger drawn. Now, I don't know if she's actually going to hurt Sansa, but there's certainly a threat of violence there. And later, Sansa sends away Brienne, the only person who's standing between her and Arya, which makes you think maybe both girls are planning violence against one another. And it doesn't help that the director for last week confirms this. Here's the director of Beyond the Wall, Alan Taylor, speaking with the Huffington Post. He says, I think both characters have been through absolute hell since the death of their father in very different ways, and have turned into absolute lethal individuals. We're very aware of how lethal Arya is, because she's displayed it over and over again. But I love the fact that the tables do turn back and forth between them. It really is a shifting back and forth of power between them in those scenes we had. And when Sophie says she won the Battle of the Bastards, she's right. I love the fact that these two come back. They're both lethal, and I just wanted to give the impression, as much as possible, that one of them is going to die, but you're not sure which one. Okay, so just let that soak in for a second. The director of Beyond the Wall wants to give the impression, as much as possible, that either Arya or Sansa is going to die. And he's doing that, well, the show's doing that, by pitting them against each other over a manufactured conflict that both girls are too smart to fall for. This is Littlefinger plotting and scheming against people who should be aware at least a little bit of what a plotter and schemer is, and yet it feels like no one's actually talking to each other. Now, a lot of people believe, and I understand this belief, a lot of people believe that this is a bait and switch, that Arya, perhaps along with Sansa and Bran even, are trying to fool Littlefinger. But what's the point of that? Why even have that plot take place? It would be so easy for Arya to just, take Littlefinger out. Meanwhile, we have to endure these terrible scenes. And I get that some people think these are good scenes. They're worried about, Arya and Sansa. They're worried. What I'm worried about is that the show will actually follow through with this. That they'll actually have one of the Starks take out one of the other Starks. Even if it is a ploy against Littlefinger, it hardly makes sense. It's all built on sand. It's built on this idea that the Stark girls wouldn't talk to each other. They wouldn't talk to Bran. That Jon wouldn't send a raven saying, I'm doing good down in Dragonstone, gonna go fight the White Walkers now. It's built on all manner of contrivances, forced drama, and characters acting out of character simply to further the plot. I think it's dragging down the entire season. I can forgive almost every other thing about Season 7, even the gripes I've had with fast travel and other sort of nonsensical plotting. I can forgive it all. I can sit back and enjoy the spectacle. I can enjoy the dragon melting the army of the dead. I can enjoy the Night King spearing Viserion. I can enjoy it all. I can let it all go, but I can't let this go. I'm going to wrap this up with a conversation between Jon and Sansa right after they reunited after the Battle of the Bastards. Sansa had just pretty much saved the day by bringing the Knights of the Vale to help Jon. She apologizes because she didn't tell him about that. She didn't tell him beforehand that she had these knights or that Littlefinger was there. And he comes up and looks her in the eyes and says,
"We need to trust each other. We can't fight a war amongst ourselves. We have so many enemies now."
That's pretty good advice. I'm not sure really why the show has gone in such an opposite direction. I know that this story isn't always what we want it to be. I know that it's hard sometimes. Sometimes our favorite characters get killed for terrible reasons, but often because of consequences for the actions they themselves make. Eddard was foolish and didn't listen to advice, played his cards poorly against Cersei. Robb married for love rather than for politics, and it came back to haunt him. There's always a reason. But here, reason seems to have just gone out the back door. And if something bad happens because of bad writing, well, that's really going to suck. Thanks for listening.